We are live. If you're watching this via Hot Mic, we're live anyway. Listen to it via podcast. Welcome to the Blue Rooms, the transfer show. We are back. Hope everybody's doing well, staying safe. And joining me, two lads who I know love going down rabbit holes when it comes to transfer rumours. Love talking about players from far-flung corners of the world that Everton are linked with. Love talking about lads who are going to be going out the door. It's Rob Vera and Dave Downey. Rob, how are you? Are you excited to get stuck into all this again?
Honestly, Matt, I'm just so thrilled that you are coming over to my side of, coming to my religion, essentially, of understanding just how great the transfer window is. And because I should point out that normally we don't do this until the summer, and Matt was so excited to start talking about transfers that this is all his initiative. So I'm excited because I can feel your enthusiasm, and it's almost like you're willing the transfer window to open up, which is something I also really appreciate. And I think that's, as I've said many times in the last few weeks, I am ready at any point for them to just open up the transfer window and close the season down so we can get on with it.
What about you, Dave?
I'm more excited to see who goes for once than who we are bringing in, because it's obviously all of this pandemic's been a period of reflection and things like that, hasn't it? And my sort of most sincere, most overriding feeling towards the football club is we've got so much work to do. I think we've done as well as we possibly can with Carlo coming in and the little bit of a ride we had with Duncan Ferguson before that. But if you look at the actual nitty-gritty of this squad, there's some real improvement needs to be forthcoming as soon as possible if we're to reflect what I'm sure Carlo Ancelotti wants to do. I've said it many times. I think it's a mark on how good of a manager he is that he's able to get something out of this group of players, which is ultimately subpar. And I think as well, before the lockdown was initiated, before the Premier League stopped, I think we are finally getting towards the end of, people talk about peaks and troughs with this pandemic. I think we were getting to the point where we were going down a little bit of a trough with this squad. I think things were starting to plateau, to put it mildly. The results against the sides that we always hope to challenge weren't good enough, culminating in that dreadful performance against Chelsea. So from that point of view, I think it happened at a decent time, but it's time to get some of this deadwood off the books.
Yeah, nice positive note to start on there.
Well, it is a positive if we can shift these players. We need to get rid in order to go forward.
Yeah, Matt. Just to add to what Dave's saying, I'm also, I talk about this a lot from the standpoint that the transfer window, as much as we think it is ostensibly about player acquisition, it's really more about the totality of team building and what that entails. And that includes those who go out, those who come in, but also those who are being developed and seeing that development in the way that we saw with players like Mason Holgate and Calvert-Lewin last year. You saw certain players certainly take a step forward. I mean, I think that, I feel like, given that there were a lot of open questions about him being able to function at all in the defense, that Yerry Mina had a very good, solid season. I think there's questions about Luka Dean, though I don't think anyone questions whether or not he's going to be part of this moving forward. But I think that the team building aspect of it's important. And I think that part of what we have to acknowledge, because Dave is absolutely right, we were starting to, whether you want to say that the new manager bounce or magic was wearing off a little bit or what have you, I think we can all acknowledge that going into this season, I think that we can identify more solid foundational pieces of this squad moving forward than we probably would have acknowledged going into last season. But as Dave says, there is still a lot of work to do. And this sounds weird to say, but our deficiencies are super obvious for anyone to see, as opposed to them being, a combination of nuanced things. I mean, granted, I think you could make an argument that, well, we could get a little more out on the left from Bernard or Iwobi or whatever. Like, you can make those types of arguments, but I think everyone also acknowledges we absolutely need help in central midfield. We absolutely need more attacking flair on the right wing. We absolutely need to address what the right back position is going to look like. So I think in terms of the obvious core big holes or big things that need to be addressed. The good news is that the questions themselves are relatively clear at this point, and it's all about how we answer them at this point.
Yeah, and that's how I was sort of going to start the show today. I mean, effectively, these shows are going to be doing them every week. Going to try and give them a bit of a different format. We'll be having a general chat at the start of each show. We're also going to do a little game of one in, one out, which we're effectively going to ask the guys and ask the guests if they could get a player out the door and bring in a player in the door for roughly the same sort of transfer fee. I'll determine whether that's feasible or not. Sorry to anyone who can't hear me there. I've just heard Mike Moran saying I can't hear what I'm saying. I'll figure that out in a second. But yeah, we're going to do that, and we're going to sort of look back at previous transfer windows as well and see what people think in regards to how we could have done it better, what players Everton could have brought in, who were the players that effectively were not suited to the football club and that sort of thing. But what Rob said there, Dave, in regards to, there are obvious areas of the squad in regards to right back, midfield, right wing, centre back as well. Are they the key areas for you? Are they the four ones you look at and sort of go, well, apart from the forwards, it's that right hand side of the football pitch?
No, I'm a little bit different, and I think it won't come as a surprise to some people to hear where I think needs strengthening most, and that's the midfield. A lot of people seem to hang their coat on Gbamin coming back in. I'm not so sure that is wise, because he's been out he will have been out for almost a year. Is it around that? Yeah, it is, isn't it? By the time we start playing, and certainly it'll be around a year or probably past a year. I think you're treading water if you expect a player who's been out for that long to come back in and have the immediate impact you want him to. Add to the fact that he's had about an hour's worth of Premier League football, and we don't really know much about him. He doesn't know much about us. A lot of people saying it'll be like a new signing. Yes, it will do, but new signings have those problems too that aren't blighted by injury. So that's a first concern. I think if you don't want to assess the midfield in who you think we should prioritise as a striker, your defence of that point would be Gbamin, I'm guessing, and Gomez, and have them to strike up a really decent partnership. That, of course, might happen, but I think we need to act with real caution, particularly in Gbamin's case, and also Gomez as well. We need to remember, the cataclysmic injury that he suffered.
Yeah.
For him to come back so quick, it's great. It's a miracle. We all lauded that, but the sort of side effects that come with that tend to come to the fore a little bit further down the line. You see players tail off, and I believe that there's a case to say a couple of times in the games that followed that initial great sort of second debut against Arsenal that he was tailing off even then, and he was being relied upon very, very heavily even then. You just think back to that United game at home where he was run ragged, and he was really flagging through. No fault of his own, really, because I'm sure he's putting everything in. He's so glad and happy to be back. But I also think the other side of that coin is it shows that we're pretty desperate to get him in there as quick as possible. I'd have liked personally to see more cameo and fleeting performances like he did in that initial Arsenal game, and then seeing him back to full fitness and match fitness, which is completely different, of course. Then you tell me who else we've got in there who's worthy of being in our starting 11. And there's nobody. There is absolutely nobody. Davis has to go on loan at the very, very least, soon as possible. Schneiderlin, probably the best of a bad bunch, and that is not saying much. And I go back to that point when he come on, Gomez against Arsenal, he put everybody else to shame with just a half-hour performance of trying to get the ball forward, trying to get it into the strikers, and trying to make something happen. Nobody else does that. And we're talking about a guy who'd broken his ankle 4 months ago. Yeah. And everyone else in there is just a much of a muchness to me. When I see our starting 11, I look at that midfield and I think, right, you've got to put in either ends of the pitch. I've got to do something pretty outstanding for Everton to win games, because the midfield is not really going to help in either side. That's a little bit of hyperbole, but I feel as if that's genuinely it. We need a real good defensive performance, or we need Calvert-Lewin and Richarlison to fire, and that's what they've done this season, which I think takes a little bit of the focus off the deficiencies in midfield.
And I suppose as well, Dave, it's one of them, isn't it? Because these lads were all signed with playing 4-2-3-1 or 4-3-3 in mind. They were the systems that Marco Silva, he effectively played 4-2-3-1 exclusively, and then everyone thought it was going to become 4-3-3, but it didn't actually become that ever in the end, really. And I think that the issue we've got, and like we put this question out today about players who we're going to sign, and someone mentioned Dwight McNeil as an option. It was Neil on Twitter. And I think one of the comments someone said was, he's ideally suited playing on the left-hand side in a 4-4-2. And you look at him and think, yeah, he is suited for that. That's the ideal sort of position for him, and probably the ideal system for him. I suppose we look at midfielders and look at the midfielders we've got now. You wouldn't say any of them are really, certainly central midfielders, are of the mould you'd expect to be able to play in a 4-4-2. And I think the other week when we were speaking on Subs Weekly, Paddy mentioned this about that Leicester team that won the league. They had Kante and Drinkwater, and you look at them two as a partnership and say, yeah, they're pretty ideal for a 4-4-2 midfield. Those lads are equipped to play. They've got the physical and technical tools to play in that system. The players we've got currently, none of them really look like that. Even Schneidler, I know what you're saying about potentially being the best of a bad bunch, but in terms of carrying the ball forward and being, a vertical player as opposed to a horizontal player, he's not got that. And I think central midfielders in 4-4-2 need to be able to go, get the ball distributed, play horizontally, but they need to be able to break lines and carry the ball forward as well. And we haven't really got anyone who's in that mold. And I'd include Andre Gomez in that, to be honest.
I think that's right, and I think we had a perfect person in that in Idrissa Gueye, and he had to finish. But one thing that I think a lot of people are starting to dodge is where are the players who can play in a versatile shape and a versatile lineup? I don't hate pigeonholing players as certain types, because the fella who become all of this mishmash of managers before, Roberto Martinez started it off, was David Moyes, and to his credit, and I know a lot of people are reticent to do that these days, but he just acquired player after player who had versatility as one of the key attributes. And I don't see why we can't adopt that in our recruitment. I'm not saying that, you can get the likes of Steve Watson, who's going to play you right back, right wing, and up front. We don't need to do that, because financially, hopefully financially, we're in a pretty sound position to be able to acquire specialist players for positions. But I think if you're a midfield player in the modern day, I think, and this is a general comment about how people read football these days, there's so many people who just love to pigeonhole players into certain positions, and I don't really buy that. You make that point about Gomez, which is absolutely right, because he hasn't proven that he probably could do that role. But if you're Andre Gomez and the manager asks you to do a job that is maybe a little bit different to the one that you naturally do because you've done it for your whole career, if you're a talented footballer, that should be no problem at all. You should be able to play a variety of roles in your position. Do you know what I mean? So if we need Gomez to play third forward,
is it just a case of some players can't, some players haven't got the legs or the aggression to do that? Yeah.
But that's the indictment, I think, of firstly the club's recruitment in recent years, and also how incapable a lot of our midfield players are to be able to adapt to a job that the manager's asking them to do. And in us getting Carlo Ancelotti, and with us still having a lot of deadwood that we've had for maybe 3 or 4 years now, it is categorically wrong to label any blame, or most of the blame, on the manager from this point forward. Firstly, if Carlo Ancelotti can't get a turn out of these players, there's something seriously wrong with these players. And I think for once now we're in a position where the dynamics changed. We've been, as a fan base, I think, fast to criticise managers. In many cases, yes, that's probably been the case. But for the sake of that in its place, a lot of players are getting away with things. A lot of players aren't sort of pointed out, and people don't criticise them because they think, well, this will all change if we get a manager in who's able to get the best out of them. Well, we've gone and done that. We've gone and got the best manager available. And yet there's still players who are still saying these aren't good enough. So the book's on them now. Everything stops with them. And that, for me, separates the wheat from the chaff. A lot of people have commented on Ancelotti's selections. And I'm very much of the opinion that a lot of it was a test. A lot of it was sort of trial and error in what he wants to do with this team. And a lot of it was who he wants to keep and who he wants to let go. And I think he's got his answer. And I'd say 98% of that team need to go.
Just very quickly, Rob, Mike Moran on Hot Mike has said Gomez and Gabama I'd keep for the midfield. Possibly Davis, but Schneidler and Delph and Sigurdsson can go.
Okay.
Yeah, look. Excuse me. I think that there are, and tell me if this sounds familiar, guys. There are a lot of unanswered questions about the guys that we've got on this team. There are also a lot of there are also a lot of questions that seem very firmly answered, but yet we keep asking questions, if that makes sense, right? Like, we joke about the blood oath that every manager takes to place Gylfi Sigurdsson no matter what, or Theo Walcott no matter what. I mean, I have taken, I'm definitely still in very much to Dave's point. I whether you want to call it a honeymoon period or what have you with the manager, in that I think that especially once we were out of the cup competitions, that he was doing or he could do or had license to do, regardless of what we think of, what he was doing. He had the license to tinker. He had the license to experiment, and he did, because I've been saying for years that the biggest wasted opportunity. Oops, sorry. I've been saying for years that the biggest wasted opportunity at Everton for several seasons running is that we don't take advantage of those fixtures where we can see what other players have, what they don't have, etc. I think the other issue,
don't we?
Yeah. And what's funny too is that, to Dave's point, there are some players who aren't versatile, but I'd also argue that those players who aren't very versatile also don't seem to be good in really any position. I'm at the point now where I'm not sure. I've seen it, and I keep coming back to this, and I'll use Gylfi's an easy example. He's just in it, given his profile, his strengths, his weaknesses, what have you, and I still think he has some very specialist type skills. He's just not a good fit at Everton at this stage anymore, for whatever reason. Michael Keane, he had one good season, like 80% of a good season next to Kurt Zuma, but I think we've all kind of begun to see that he's just not versatile enough to play, full time in a position that sometimes against the best clubs is going to require someone who can't just be this very niche specialist type of defensive player. Yeah. So, but on the other hand, and this is where it gets a little maddening, is we look at players like Alexander Iwobi or Bernard, who we look at and we have seen in the past played in other types of midfield positions, and yet we're constantly just shifting them out to the left and wanting it to work. And sometimes it does a little bit on the off game, and then other times it doesn't. I mean, I don't know if it's a question of, it's a question of them finding the right position, or, to Dave's point, saying to yourself, look, the formation and this obsession with formation constantly needs to shift to a discussion of, I have talented players. What can I do week to week to get the best out of this group of players and take advantage of their skills? Matt, you and I were talking offline before we got on this call about the NFL draft, or about the NFL free agency and the draft. And one of the things that comes to mind is a coach who's going through the drafting process and saying, well, do we draft this player because he fits better in our particular type of defensive scheme or our particular type of offensive scheme? And I heard one coach who was quoted this week, this is a Dallas Cowboys related story, but he basically said, look, you draft good players, and it is on us as coaches to find the best way to make them successful and to utilize and leverage their talents in a way that's most effective for us. I think that is a universal truth in sport in general, and I think especially
with the director of football model Everton have got, that is effectively what it is, isn't it?
Yes, and we talked about this 4-3-3 that was this magical unicorn that we were never going to actually see, but that we knew how we had a theory of what it looked like. It just never came. Like, what I want to see, and I loved that he stuck with the 4-4-2, to get some momentum, to get players scoring, and really to kind of cover up for what we can't do in midfield at this point to a certain degree. But I think moving forward, if we're going to go anywhere, and if Ancelotti is the manager that we think he is, and I do believe that he is, it's got to be about acquiring players and retaining players and talents who are versatile enough to Dave's point, either be moved around the formation or to have certain weeks where they sit against certain teams because we're using a different formation, but it doesn't mean that they're not useful. And I think until we really master that a little bit more, and we create a baseline expectation of performance regardless of, whether you're sitting, whether you're starting, whether you're playing in this position this week and so on, granted, there are certain players who are always going to be like Calvert-Lewin's a striker. I get that. But in general, I think that there's got to be, especially as we talk about midfield, if we're bringing in an effective player in midfield, I'm less concerned about what formation he's played in the past and more concerned about whether or not he's a quality impact player. Because as Dave and I talked about a lot, I know in recent conversations, I don't think Everton need 8 new players. What I think is that they need difference makers in some key positions, true difference makers, not guys who, used to be good at somewhere else or who are 20 years old and might be good in 4 years. Everton really do need to bring in some guys in their mid-20s who have been successful in other places. And it's not easy to do, but I think that that's going to move the needle. And suddenly the conversation shifts from this rigid formational conversation more into a conversation about nuance and so on.
Well, I think that in itself is an issue, David. If I agree with Rob's sentiments there. I suppose if you're looking to buy 4 difference makers, as Rob puts it, and get them in the side who are of the age, 25, 26 years old, then that's going to cost an absolute ton of money, isn't it? To get those players through the door who can make a difference and make Everton go from being a club that's mid-table to being a top 6 challenger, you're probably looking at about £50 million a player. And at the moment, given the money Everton have spent and have, effectively flushed down the drain in recent years in regards to players like that, but as much as that's what we need and that will be the remedy for this team, it's not going to happen, is it?
That amount of money is not going to happen, no. But the whole point in this was it was Marcel Brand's remit to sort this sort of thing out, wasn't it? And I'm pretty sure if you pinned him to it, he would tell you that it's been much more difficult than what even he foreseen when he come in this club. Because even when he's been here, there's still an aptitude for wasting money. There's still an aptitude for not getting the right players on board and recruitment still being an issue. It's been much better, but there are still players there we've spent an excessive amount of money on who simply don't fit the bill. Or simply, you talk about that 4-4-2 formation, and I strongly believe that Ancelotti's only used it because he found out to get the best out of the front 2 players that we've got. He's found a real chemistry between them two. Beyond that, you look at those players, you look at that squad, you think, does 4-4-2 fit them? Does 4-2-3-1 fit them? I look at it and think there's no, and it's what you've always said, Mike. You're trying to put square pegs in round holes, aren't you? It's a mishmash of a squad, and the problem you have is you're getting rid of them at different times. You're bringing players in to replace them at different times who will then take time themselves to mix in with the ones who are also in the same sort of category as that. That's why this, in many ways, I deemed when we got Brands a real difficult job, nearly impossible for him to do, because there's that much work that needs to be done before you even start talking about what formation best fits the players. And then you need to go down the rabbit hole Rob's just mentioned in terms of that NFL analogy you used, where do you buy the players for the position, or do you position the players that you buy? And that seems to be a real dilemma we've had for such a long time, that even when Carlo Ancelotti's here, obviously in his formative stages of his management, and also Brands, we haven't really been able to solve, and nobody seems to have come up with a plan to say, right, this is how we're going to do things.
David, sorry, that's the product. That's just the product of so much stability, isn't it? There's been no clear thread. We've had 2 directors of football in the space of, 4 years. We've had about 4 different managers in that time as well. There's been changes at the top of the club. There's been new players coming in, and the clubs that can do that, and the clubs that mould those 2 principles that you mentioned there about the NFL analogy, probably do a bit of both for them. But they've got a common and clear thread running through them, and they'll have people who are trustworthy and competent at the top of the club making those jobs and making those decisions. And ultimately, Everton have been in a position where they've had different people making different decisions for so long now. It goes back to that thing we've been saying for years. It's a Frankenstein football team at the moment as a result.
But you can change that personnel as much as you like. The problem becomes the more and more you dig this hole for yourself, the more difficult it is to get back out of it. And that's why we're seeing the financial constraints that we look like we're going to be under in regards to FFP. I think we're going to be really under the microscope. Maybe the pandemic has an influence on that. Maybe it doesn't, but I'd like to think it does. I'd like to think it's helpful in this case, because we seem to be teetering on the list of, well, you've spent, and you've not recouped much money in commercial activities and things like that. That's where this club is always going to end up because of the negligent and ridiculous recruitment efforts that they made under Steve Walsh and how that money was spent. We are paying the price of that now. And once again, the great irony is we've probably got the two best people at the club who, given a clean slate, go back 4 years, 5 years. And if you had them in place in Brands and Ancelotti, this would be a hell of a lot easier of a process. But we are going to be blighted and hamstrung. And many people pointed it out under Koeman and Walsh that this is going to hurt us for years to come. And I think we're very much in the middle of that right now. I don't see how they go about changing this without some real innovation. They need to think massively outside the box here, particularly Brands, in how we sort this out, because we're not going to get rid of the players we want to get rid of by completely sweeping the board. We can't do that. It's proven that we can't do that, and we can't find suitors for these players. That's where the problem lies. You eliminate that roadblock, and then it gets to be a little bit easier. You can start sort of selling high and hopefully buying low, buying potential, going with the plan that I think he's had from the start, which is players in the early 20s, mid 20s at the very, very most that we're going to pay for, develop them, and then we'll go from there. They become saleable assets or they become actual assets on the pitch. That's what the design is. I just still don't know how we get past it. It's like everything's clogged up, isn't it? You need some sort of drainage cleaner or something like that to just sort of burst through.
Well, and Dave brings up something that I think we all need to. I think that if I have one thing that I want to try to hammer home, and I actually think that there's some positive in what I'm about to say too, in regards to this process and in regards to team building and the transfer window and so on. It's that this isn't like a game that you can hit the reset button on and just clear the decks.
That's what we tried to do, though, and that's been to our detriment.
Well, but what I'm saying is that each window you try to phase out players that are no longer, and I think we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the fact that since Marcel Brands has come in, he has actually gotten rid of quite a bit of the dead wood. Of course, it speaks to how much there was, that there's still quite a bit here. But I would also argue, guys, that no club operates on 100% squad efficiency. And what I mean by that is that even the best clubs don't look at every single player they have and say, perfect, no problems, never need to improve. I think that we have to be of the mindset that there's always going to be some of that churning at the bottom of the squad list, where there becomes opportunity to move out players who maybe have reached a stage of their career, maybe have not achieved certain benchmarks or whatever. You backfill those with young prospects, with players that you want to develop, and you keep doing it. I think the positive that I would say, and I go back to what I said at the beginning of this, and this does, of course, require a real hard look at what we've got, is to say, okay, if I ditch the conversation about specific formation and I just look at who are the players that I've got that I want to keep that actually look like they could be part of something good. Because I used to talk about this idea that, like, now granted, forgive me here because Matt will totally snicker at this, but back when Calvert-Lewin couldn't score or do anything, he couldn't score any goals at all, and Matt was still telling me that he was Harry Kane, I was saying that, okay, fine, but is Calvert-Lewin the kind of guy that is going to be what we want starting for us when we are competing for great things, right? Like a Champions League spot or what have you. Now, granted, he has had that development since then, and we obviously all acknowledge he's very good. But the general point I was trying to make at the time was this notion that you have to look at the players that you've got and say, all right, are they just good enough to get by right now? Are these pieces that I could see if the squad was where we want it to be in 2 years, they would still be playing a big part in this, right? And I think right now I think we've played this game before, guys. Like, you can look at that squad right now, and I know we make the blanket generalization of, get rid of 98% of them. Well, we can't get rid of 98%, and I would argue that in terms of players I could still see being an effective part of this moving forward. You've got Richarlison, you've got Calvert-Lewin, you've got Mason Holgate. I still tend to think that Yerry Mina's part of that, though, again, whatever. But I still think that's Luka Dean had kind of a down season and yet still created a ton of chances for his position. Like, I still think that right there, and I'm just going off the top of my head, that's 5 players right there. And that's not nothing, is my point. Is 5 players may not seem like much to you, but if you've got 5 players who you think are really solid contributors who are still at the age profile that you like, that's something to begin to work with. And that's more than I'd say we had going into this season. So the question then becomes, what do you do to address it? And my point about difference makers was that if you discard this notion of having to force yourself into this formational conversation, which I think is a really limiting paradigm, and Dave, I think you're right. Like, I think we have to think in bigger terms of how do we get the most out of the good players that we've got? Well, I don't mean to sound like I'm being, if I can use one of your words, daft here, but I would say that instead of trying to find, trying to find pieces that fit into this 4-4-2 or this 4-3-4-2-3-1 or 4-3-3 that you've designed, just look at these 5 players and say, what can we do to help them get other good players? And I'm not saying that it's easy, and I'm not saying you have to spend $50 million on every single one. That's what the director of football's job is to be able to identify the players who can come in and make a difference, not those that are going to come in and have to score 50 goals to make them worth it, but players who can come in and like you said, Dave, you look at the Andre Gomez situation, it doesn't seem like it would take much to bring in a quality midfielder who would make a huge difference for this squad, given how poor we are in certain positions. So I think it's all about saying, I want to bring in a player in the midfield. I want to bring in a player at right back. I want to bring in a player on the right wing, et cetera, that have been productive, that have the arrow pointed up, that are reaching that particular stage. You can argue that Gabriel is, who from Lille, who we've been mostly tied to at this point, is probably a good profile for that sort of player. He's already begun to play well. He's of a certain age profile. He's been in a squad that's been competing for things. Those players are out there, and that's the director of football's job to find them. But tinkering around the edges and paying a lot of money, Dave, to your point, for 8 players who help you kind of inch forward, as opposed to spending that money on 3 or 4 players who can make a more significant difference. Again, not saying it's easy, but I'm saying that to me has to be the approach, because we're not completely destitute of good players. We've got some good players, but we need more good players. And I know I'm oversimplifying it there, but to me, that the formational questions begin to get answered once you have a better, more talented squad.
I suppose in the same breath as well, Dave, you want, it sounds obvious to say, but you need that competition in certain areas of the squad. And, Rob mentioned the Gabriel there. And, obviously, if it was Ed Aarons of The Guardian who reported maybe a couple of weeks ago now that Everton have, made concrete proposals to his representatives. Looks like the deal could go through for 30 million, which is all very encouraging. And, that's led to some discussions. We had a chat on the Kickabout this week, Rob, about who's going to be Everton's starting centre-back duo should Gabriel come in. What does it mean for the other lads as centre-back? And I suppose in an ideal world, you sort of want those conversations all over the squad. And at the moment, you're sort of scratching around going, well, who can play right wing? Well, Theo Walcott can do an all right job there, but
right.
he's not being pushed by anyone in particular. On the left wing at the moment, it's sort of a case of anybody who'll fit there, because Bernard's not been playing particularly well. Iwobi's out of favour. Sigurdsson's just, a fellow who takes set pieces and doesn't do much else. And I think if you can get a centre-back like that in, and you can make genuine competition and have a genuine headache, and you can sort of make that happen throughout the rest of the squad. Say if Moise Keane kicks on next year, and all of a sudden you say, well, he's starting up front, in the front 2 out of those 3, making it hard. That's sort of something we haven't really got in many positions at all, really, you could say.
Well, Matt, I want to just point something out. That's actually a great point, and it's something we don't talk about a lot. But, it was really interesting to me. And again, I'm not saying you can make the correlation causation argument here, but, it's not that anyone doubted whether Calvert-Lewin was working really hard. But I do find it interesting that as soon as Everton made their most high-profile summer signing this past season of a striker from Italy, that I think that had to make Calvert-Lewin better. I am, like, for instance, we all have our there's an expression called we all have our pet cats, like our guys that we just love irrationally or whatever. you guys know, I love Yerry Mina. Dave, you haven't even seen my cool Yerry Mina Columbia shirt that I just recently got. It's amazing.
I have seen it. I did.
You did see it. Okay, yeah. It's fantastic. Anyway, I love Yerry Mina, but I am someone who looks at Yerry Mina and says, I like him and I believe in him enough that I don't think that he is immune from competition. Any club that wants to do something ought to have 3 center halves that are really competing hard for those either 2 spots or occasionally from a formational position, a formational flexibility standpoint, 3 spots. I want that.
Well, look at Liverpool, Rob. They have Van Dijk who starts every game, and then he effectively chooses between Gomez, Matip, and Lovren, doesn't he? Gomez is probably ahead of the other 2 just about, but Matip played a lot last season. Lovren, bit of a laughing stock sometimes, but he does a job in the main when he comes into the side. I think that's sort of the ideal situation, isn't it? Having one where you can go, right, he is the lad who we build around. He's the bedrock of this defence. And the other 3 are sort of challenging. And you have probably a bit of a pecking order there, but not a set pecking order. There is room for those lads to move around in there.
Yeah, you know what the really cool magical thing about competition for places is that it affords you, obviously it affords you flexibility, but it's amazing what it does for certain players in terms of insulating them from the big dips and ebbs and flows of their game. Let's be honest, Everton, if there is one way to describe Everton over the last decade, it's been hot streaks followed by cold streaks, followed by an okay streak, followed by a cold streak, followed by hot. The key to consistency is, for instance, I love Mason Holgate. I think he had a really nice season overall. Now, how much do I want to buy into that? Am I willing to buy into it so much that I just take for granted he's going to just go out there and do that again? I don't know that. The signs are all the signs are good. Same with Yerry Mina. Same with Calvert-Lewin, etc. To me, the way that you keep players sharp and you keep them motivated, especially once you've given them their money, by the way, Holgate and Calvert-Lewin now have really nice contracts. The way that they don't get fat and happy on that is A, their professionalism, of course, but B, being pushed by competition. And so when we look at the transfer window for Everton, I think you've got 2 categories. One is positions like midfield where there's just not enough talent, full stop. There's just needs to be an injection of quality and talent in that area. Whereas in defense, central defense, or even amongst our wing players, our strikers, etc., there's room there for more competition. Now, I don't think we need to sign a striker this summer. Personally, I would like to see them stick with a development course unless Moise Kean just can't handle. But I think he can. And I think you can work with that. But my point is that you sign players that can really come in and give competition, because whether you get it out of that player that you signed or you get it from the players that are already here who suddenly take that next step up, especially young players, I think that right there is the real payoff.
Sorry, Dave, what are you going to jump in there?
He was mesmerized by all my wisdom.
Yeah, the competition for places is something that I think managers always try and achieve. The best ones always do anyway. You think about great United sides of the past and what Liverpool are doing this season. But again, go back to that point about versatility. You look at that Liverpool squad and there's players in there. Their midfield in particular, who I think on an individual basis probably are the strongest. I think of Wijnaldum. I think he's a really good midfield player, but he's certainly not the best. Henderson, who's likely to win Player of the Year, I think he has his flaws in certain areas too. Again, being magnificent this year. Oxlade-Chamberlain can be quite streaky in how he plays. Naby Keita just hasn't caught fire. Each of those, though, Klopp can name any 3 in that midfield.
He's got Milner and Fabinho as well, hasn't he? And Lallana. And you just drop in and they'll do a job.
And Milner's a great case in point because he can play anywhere across that pitch, and he's invaluable for that. That's why he's still there, getting a game at the age of, 33, 34 years old. That's why.
Looks like he's 45, but yes.
Yeah. But think back to Gareth Barry and that versatility he brought us. Yes, he was a defensive midfielder for the large part of his career with Everton, but he was a left back at Aston Villa. These players will give you 7, 8 out of 10 absolute gold dust in the side, because they will make up for what you miss in other areas. So You talk about, look at even Gomez there, you mentioned there for Liverpool, can play at fullback as well. Yeah. Lovren's played at fullback. Van Dijk's pushed up into sort of a defensive midfield type role when Liverpool are playing against a crap team, and he can just sit there all day knocking the ball around as much as he likes. That side to play his games is something we've desperately lacked for many years now, in my opinion. And
multi-dimensional players.
Yeah, Holgate probably is one, to be honest. Holgate can fill in defensive midfield if we need him to. He's got pace. He can play a fullback if required as well. It looks like it doesn't come as a problem to some of those players, but for so many, for us, it really does. It really is an issue. And in regards to competition for places, I think when you aspire to be a club that does that they're the best clubs that do it. You don't have a club that wins trophies, mainly league titles, doesn't have an issue with who plays at a certain position. Yes, there's a slight fall off, but you've got somebody you can come in and you can trust. And trust's a big word for players, and should be for us as well. When we've got players on the fringes, Fabian Delph, for instance, should be a trustworthy player for us. I don't think he is. I don't think he's proven that since he's been here. But somebody like him, experienced, versatile, can you throw him in there and get a performance where you don't miss an Andre Gomez 1 week? I don't think you can. And that's the chasm I think we have to fix, to fill, to get players in there who, no, I'm not talking about a Phil Neville type or, like I said, going back to yesteryear with Steve Watson, but somebody like, a Tim Cahill, for instance. When we had Tim Cahill, everyone regards him for his goals and his important goals for us. But
I don't even know what position Tim Cahill played most of the time.
Exactly. Well, the thing is, he was known for ghosting into the box and getting his head on things because he was difficult to pick up, because he didn't necessarily have a position.
Yeah.
He was free to roam. It wasn't rigid. 4-4-2, by the way, does call for a rigid system, I think. Your creative players, I think, are a little bit nullified because they don't have the freedom to move. You need to stay in a flat four. It's only the wingers that tend to benefit from that system. And from that point of view, Matt, you're absolutely right. We don't have anybody, I don't think, who can play that role competently. But that is one hell of a frustration for me, that some of these can't. Some of these can't just simply change a little bit to adapt a position that they should easily be able to do. So they would have played in various roles when they were growing up as kids. You hear it all the time, don't we? Jamie Carragher was top marksman in the kids' league and all this. Where's all that gone? And where's it gone in our case? So in terms of bringing players in for particular positions, I'd like to see somebody like Gabam in there. There's a perfect example. Can play centre-half as well. There's a box ticked for you. If he's a good, solid defensive midfield player, great. We've got a defensive crisis. You can throw him in there as well, and you can trust him. And that's that's the type of profile I want to see us sign.
Well, I think for me, I think we spoke about this a little bit earlier in the season, and we sort of highlighted Michael Keane. And it's not necessarily, I don't really think it's versatile for me in regards to players being able to play all over the pitch. It's lads who can be, I think in the example of Keane, we said, when he's pushed out of his comfort zone, then everything seems to break down a little bit with him. And I think there's two things there, and either of these things can adhere to different players to make them not versatile, as I call it there. One is that they haven't got the mentality to deal with it, and if they've not got in Michael Keane's case, if they've not got a rapid defender in Kurt Zouma to one side of him, if he's not got an authoritative midfielder in front of him who's like one of the best tackler and interceptors in the game, and it's a game.
If it's not sunny and perfect weather and the pitch, the length of the pitch blades of grass are this much, that's the problem with guys like Keane, is that it's not so much. It's not. And I hate to pick on Keane, but you could say this about Sigurdsson as well. But like guys who only fit. Not only it's beyond system, it's scenarios. He has to be in this system, this kind of player, to the left of him, to the right of him, in front of him. Guys like that create a domino effect of bad choices that you ultimately end up having to make. And that's why I want rid of those types.
And I think if you've had a manager in place for 5 or 6 years, who's put his style across and knows exactly what he wants to do, it's fine signing a player like that, because invariably you are going to play that way with players who are suited to play in that way. And you'll be able to substitute one player out, substitute one player in, and things will largely stay the same because the players around you will stay the same in the main, and you'll have lads in front of you who can sort of do that job, like Milner does for Liverpool, or like Lallana does for Liverpool.
Matt, have you ever played FIFA Ultimate Team? Or have you seen the concept?
The new FIFA's crap, I think. I've not really played it much.
Yeah, but FIFA Ultimate Team's the one all the kids play. You know, you get packs of cards.
The chemistry thing, yeah.
All of Everton to be red. The lines between every single player, probably apart from Calvert-Lewin and Richarlison, will be red. Because there isn't a chemistry between them, I don't think. Certainly on the pitch, they might all be best friends and all go out for dinner every night outside of football. But to me, there looks like there's none of that. And like you both say, so right in conditions, everything needs to be laid on a platter for these players to play well. So many of them, they need to be sort of spoon-fed the scenario of a game. So, you know, sometimes when you look at a player and you think, oh, he's up for it today. I don't ever want to have to say that because I want it to happen every week. And it should be the bare minimum you're asking of your players.
And I totally agree with all that. And just going back to what I said about Keane, I think there's sometimes there's a mentality issue when it comes to not having that comfort zone or that comfort blanket around you. And I think what also applies to him is that sometimes you just don't have the physical or technical attributes to be able to do it. And, you know, I think with Keane probably both applies. I think with Sigurdsson, both things apply as well. There are players that the mentality is an issue when they play in a different position. You know, I mean, Sidibe, when he pushed onto the right wing back against Liverpool, oh my word, his game just fell to pieces, didn't it? You know, you've got players who probably got the right sort of mindset, but just probably can't do it because they've not got the legs or they've not got the technical ability or the in-game awareness to do it. So I think it's signing those sorts of players. The position we're in now, where effectively we've got a blank canvas, we've got a new manager, hopefully a fresh start come the summer. I think we need to sign lads who maybe are a bit more comfortable when it comes to being pushed out of that comfort zone, as we mentioned there. I mean, and who those lads are, you know, that's down to the manager. But I think if you go and sign specific players, you fit a specific system, and play specific ways, you need to have a good body of work, 5 years under your belt, putting your style across, formulating the squad with that in mind, and then you can bring in those players. At the moment, I wouldn't say Everton necessarily can do that.
Right. Well, and Matt, the other thing I think will be interesting too in all of this discussion, because right now we are operating under the kind of traditional paradigm of ins and outs and how the market works and so on. I will be really interested to see what the virus and the potential suspension of this season or delayed start of a new season does to the prices on the market, especially. I think that, I mean, I'm not an economist, but part of me feels like instinctively, like if there are a lot of clubs losing money, then it becomes a buyer's market. And so I think that you can, if you're one of those clubs that, you know, still has their financial house, you know, because as much as we talk about being in FPP trouble, I don't think anyone suspects that Farhad Mashiri personally is running out of money or that the club is in really major dire straits at this point. So the question becomes, you know, how can you take advantage? It sounds lecherous, right? But how can you take advantage of an environment like that? And what we want to believe is that we've got a director of football who could take advantage of some of those market forces to maybe get players that maybe we, you know, ordinarily might not be able to. Conversely, I also think that this means that you've got to hold on to the quality players that you've got. And I will say that I'm very relieved that Everton got their house in order in terms of getting contracts done for Calvert-Lewin and Mason Holgate before a lot of the S hit the fan here. So, you know, like in that regard, I'm happy. But I think it's going to be, I think there's a lot of unknowns going into this. But as we said at the very beginning of this conversation, I think that generally speaking, that there are positions that clearly need to be addressed. You know, I'd be interested in hearing y'all's thoughts, but like Dave, I know midfield for you, if we all had to pick a different area of the pitch, I'm still really curious about the right back position because the dynamics there are really fascinating, just because Coleman, I could see being a Leighton Baines type who remains at the club, but maybe is not your everyday starter. You know, what do you do with Sidibe? Sidibe, you know, sometimes he's great and sometimes he's not, but he's also only 13 million, which is not that bad for a guy who has positional flexibility, as we've talked about. He can come in on the right wing at a time or whatever, but I don't think that's probably a long-term fit. There's John Joe Kenny. I'm not convinced that just because he's had a half-decent season away that suddenly he's great, but who knows? If they feel like he's developed, then that's an asset that you don't have to pay more money for. I'm all for that. So I think that those types of questions, there's just a lot of moving parts here, but how we answer those in some of those key positions is obviously really going to tell us a lot about what the squad looks like going into next season, whatever next season means, or whenever next season is.
Dave's cat's getting involved in the conversation there. I think you're trying to shove it off the table, Dave.
No, I'm in the spare room, so he's just sort of like pissing around.
There you go.
Let me grab him.
Yeah.
The proper little kick-off merchant.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, there he is.
I have an orange tabby as well.
He's very, very temperamental.
What's his name, Dave?
Just Ginger.
Ginger the cat.
Yeah, but you can't tell why.
You named yours Ginger. We named ours Archie after the comic book character with red hair.
Oh yeah.
It's orange.
There we go. Ginger cats up the toppies.
There you go.
I was going to do the fix the season and one in, one out to finish the show, but we all sort of run out of time a little bit. We'll do that next week. So what both of you can think about this actually over the course of the next week or so. So effectively going to do 2 features on this show going forward. One in, one out. Player who's going to go out the door, it'll cost a certain amount of money, and you'll bring in a player through the door, it'll cost a similar amount of money to that player going out. So the example I could use to start us off is Martin Stecklenburg out on a free, Ben Foster in on a free. Out of contract this summer at Watford. Good competition for Pickford, experience, seems to be the right sort of mentality. I think he'd be a dead savvy acquisition for the club. So it could be 10 million, it could be 5 million, 50 million if you want to sell Richarlison or Dominic Calvert-Lewin.
Man, Matt, speaking of competition being needed for a spot, we didn't even talk about Jordan Pickford today, which, for me took a lot of self-control. But that feels imperative. Clearly, Giannis Lassell wasn't that guy. But, that's a player who you would think could, maybe step up his game if he had some real, genuine competition behind him.
Could bring Ben Foster on after 5 minutes if we go 1-0.
Waste time. Absolute king.
He's our designated designated Newcastle starter. He
wastes time when the 1-0's down.
Yeah,
Ben Foster.
Yeah. And the other thing we're going to do, like I said, is we're going to go back in time and look at Everton transfer windows or transfers for a particular season, and we're going to try and fix them and see what happens. So the first season we're going to do is the 2015-16 season, and at the end of every show, the next one, I'm going to tell the lads, and what we're going to do, so people know what we're going to be talking about the next week, is we're going to go through that transfer window, and I'm going to see if we can remember who Everton signed in that summer and the players. So before I give you any clues, the summer of 2015-16, Roberto Martinez's last season, in total, throughout the entire campaign, so this includes January, Everton brought in 10 different players. So you can take turns in naming them. Rob, I will come to you first.
Oh, God. 15, 16. So wait, this is going into Martinez's last season?
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus. Oh, no. I'm getting all these years mixed up because whenever I hear 16, I'm automatically thinking of Koeman's first summer and Steve Walsh and all that. So I'm trying to think of that last...
There are some notable names from that last season.
I know. So for Martinez, who did he bring in that was going to make any kind of difference? God,
Dave, you want to go first?
I'm blanking. Dave, you go for it, man. I'm blanking.
McGeady was the first season.
That was
first season right in January.
First season. That'd be easy. I could do, McCarthy.
Alcaraz was also the first season, right? Used to it rubbish. I'm going to give you some clues.
Give me some positions. Schneider? No, Schneider.
So we did sign a midfielder from Man United on a free transfer. He was the first one through the door.
Oh, Darren Gibson.
Wasn't Gibson.
No, Gibson.
Cleverly.
Tom Cleverly. There's one.
Yeah.
On the same day, we signed a winger from Spain for his second spell.
De La Feu.
Yeah. We signed a Belgian forward from Olympiacos for £200,000.
What?
He
only left the club recently. Youth team superstar.
Oh, yeah.
No. The guy, he scored the goal against Spurs that was really good, and that was like...
No, it wasn't Velios, was it?
Velios, no. I'm getting...
Tarashai, was it, Matt?
Tarashai is one, but it's not
but Tarashai came from like Sweden or something.
He came in January from Grasshoppers for £3 million. Oh my word! We'll come back to that one then. We signed a defender from Barnsley for $2 million.
That John Stones or Mason Holgate.
Mason Holgate. We signed.
Mason Holgate will be Roberto Martinez's greatest signing, won't he?
Yeah, looks like. On the 28th of August, we signed a Uruguayan forward from River Plate, Uruguay.
Oh, that guy who never played for us.
I can't remember these people.
I remember him. Like, I know who he is. It's Leo.
You're nearly there. It's on the tip of your tongue.
Leo.
It's Leo something. Leonardo or
yeah.
Leonardo. Damn it, I don't know.
Have we still got him?
Leandro Rodriguez.
Oh, is it Onyekuru there?
No, he was 2 seasons later. He was 2 seasons later. We signed an Argentinian centre back for $9 million.
Ramiro Funes Mori, my barbecue hero. Yes.
We signed a right winger from Tottenham for $4 million.
Lennon. Yeah.
And in January, we've already mentioned Tarashai, who came in. We signed a centre back from Bury for an undisclosed fee. Don't think he's ever played for the club. I think he's still here.
From Bury.
He plays left back as well.
Oh, Lucas. No, not Shaw. Or not Shaw.
Lucas Dean came from Barcelona.
No. Lucas. Yeah, no. I'm thinking of.
He's thinking of Garbett.
Garbett, yeah, but that's Garbett precedes that, yeah.
Any idea, Dave, on that one?
No, I haven't got a clue.
Matthew Folds.
Oh God, Matty Folds. I'd forgotten about him. Jeez.
And the last one you should be able to get. Okay. January transfer window. Roberto Martinez last season. Big money spent on him.
Be his last signing as well, I imagine, wouldn't it?
This is his last signing. There'll be people listening to this screaming out.
I know, and you're just basically embarrassing us on a transfer.
What position?
Striker. Still at the football club.
Oh, Nias.
Nias, yeah.
Umar Nias. £13.5 million from Lokomotiv Moscow.
I just would like to say, in my defense, Everton are awful, and that's why we don't remember any of these players. Yeah,
I've blanked that out. His time with us is bookended by first signing, or one of them, Lukaku, last signing, Umar Nias.
Yeah, there you go.
It's weird how so few of Martinez's late signings made any impact in my brain, because, if you said Koeman's first summer, then that was the summer of George, to use a Seinfeld reference. That was the summer of George. We were all just over the moon, because I remember us getting, I think, Keane and Pickford and.
That was the summer after.
Wait, but
Koeman's first was Rooney. Williams, Balassi. No, Rooney was the summer after as well.
Oh yeah,
you got Williams, Balassi.
Who was our
Garner?
Yeah. Okay. Damn it.
Decent summer that.
Yeah.
Who did we have? But who did we have starting for us most of that season in goal? Was that still
Stecklenberg arrived as well? Yeah.
We had Steck and Joel. Joel was still at the club then, wasn't he?
Yeah. So next week we'll be looking back at the season and talking about why it didn't work out for those players. Tom Cleverley, Delafeu, David Hennen was the Belgian forward.
David Hennen, yes.
Mason Holgate, Leandro Rodriguez, Ramiro Funes Mori, Aaron Lennon, Matthew Folds,
I know the names once I've heard them. I'm just not good at tying back to specific years. And I will tell you, Dave, we're going to get dragged on Twitter for this. I've no doubt. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Matt, for,
You are most welcome.
If you want any advice from either me or Rob on how to blank these characters out, just give us a shout.
Yeah.
So absolutely. We'll be looking at that season. Players who went out the door, notable: Antoine Alcaraz, Las Palmas on a free, Sylvain Distin, Bournemouth on a free. John Lundstrom went to Oxford. Obviously, he's back in the Premier League now and doing really well with Sheffield United. And Stephen Naismith, $8.5 million to Norwich in January that season as well. So
hey, you know You know what player I do remember from that period that we didn't get, who I've been obsessed with for years, is Yarmolenko. See, Yarmolenko, I'll never forget.
Yeah. Oh,
he took up. He created a cancerous spot in my brain that blocked out all those other players. So that's just how it went.
We had a great chat about him on the 11 show and Everton transfer hype stories, and he was very much one of the stars. So
he almost ended my marriage.
But yeah, that's all to look forward to next week. Dave and Rob going to do you one in, one out as well in regards to the players. Hope you enjoyed that. If you tuned in on Hot Mic, thanks very much for watching on Hot Mic. I know we had some technical difficulties at the start there, but I think we got them figured out. But yeah, this has been the Transfer Show. We'll speak to you again very soon.